A court on Monday this week ruled in favor of a British government plan to fly asylum seekers to Rwanda, but also said that specific deportation cases should be reconsidered, leaving doubt as to when or whether the highly contentious policy would be put into action. Britain's move to outsource asylum applications to Rwanda is intended to deter migrants from crossing the English Channel in small boats, as well as prevent avoidable deaths such as those of 4 people who lost their lives last week making the perilous voyage. African affairs analyst Taffi Nyawanza joins us now to look at possible gains and challenges arising from the Britain-Rwanda deal for the repatriation of immigrants in light of the UK's court's affirmation. Taffi, thank you for joining us on Newsday.
Thank you for having me.
Now, it's a pleasure. I'll begin by saying that there are, of course, you've heard the various schools of thought, and some say that while the Rwanda plan may have been ruled lawful by the High Court, that does not mean it is morally acceptable. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, yes, I think, the debate continues. I'm sure you have had, no less a person than, the highest person in the Church of England declaring this to be morally indefensible. So the courts have ruled in the manner that they have, but the debate continues as regards the morality of the question. I have to say, of course, that this is far from over. So this is in the High Court. There's clearly going to be further litigation in the Court of Appeal and ultimately in the Supreme Court.
All right, Mr. Nyawanza, one of the things that has come under spotlight is Rwanda's human rights record. Now, of course, we know that in the past they have successfully hosted asylum seekers and refugees from Burundi and DRC. However, people are now questioning the alleged authoritarian regime of President Kagame and are feeling that it is unfair to send asylum seekers from the frying pan to the fire, so to speak. Now, we all know that the authoritarian tag on African countries can be a little bit, blown out of proportion by the media. Do you feel that this concern has any bearing, any merit at all with regards to this deal being signed?
Yeah, so clearly this was a major aspect of the litigation, the human rights record of the country where these deportations will be, which is Rwanda. What the government has said, or what their official position is that Rwanda is generally a safe country, and so there will be no concerns as to the safety of people returned. And then what they have also said is that because this country will be in the spotlight, arising obviously from all this litigation going on, it's very unlikely that anyone will be ill-treated. That's their position. There is no question, of course, about the terrible human rights record that Rwanda has. And we know about the extrajudicial killings. We know about the extraterritorial killing, opponents being killed abroad, outside Rwanda. So these are areas of huge concern. And you do say, of course, when it comes to Africa, these allegations are blown out of proportion in most cases. With Rwanda, however, these are justifiable concerns arising from well-documented cases of state persecution.
Well, thank you so much. Well, in terms of what the possible gains could be, we know that the UK plans to send Rwanda or pay Rwanda £120 million over the next 5 years to finance the scheme. But what's in it for the UK? And give us a better understanding of what they stand to gain with this plan.
Well, first of all, is the political benefit, isn't it? You see, the Tories, the ruling party at the moment, have pitched themselves as the government with a firm grip on immigration. Their manifesto is very clear on their intention to reduce net migration. So there's the obvious political aspect. And you will recall that the current Secretary of State for Home Affairs, the one who is responsible for this policy, or who is executing it now, is on record as saying she will not rest until the first flight takes off. So there is the clear political benefit, and then they hope that will translate into votes come 2024. But of course, ultimately, it's also about really bringing down migration numbers. You know about the problems in the English Channel, the boats coming in from France. So there is the obvious motivation to really drive down the numbers. So it is a situation where the government is very motivated to ensure that this policy succeeds.
Right. Now, this wouldn't be the first time that Rwanda would be hosting deportees. Of course, we all know about the scandal with Israel, even though it was all played under, but about 4,000 people who were estimated to have been returned, and many of them were smuggled out of Rwanda to Uganda, while others who remain in Rwanda became destitute. Now, what is the political payoff of this for both Rwanda and for the Tories if ultimately this is such a risky deal?
Well, I think the point of departure with previous incidences or the previous chapters will be that the UK government has oversight over this, and that's the trump card. That's what they are pushing, that this is our scheme. It is hosted by Rwanda, but it's really a UK scheme. So when we talk about outsourcing the asylum process, it's really in terms of the geographical location of that process. But in terms of the interviews, the process, the accommodation, the funding, it's all UK. So they are touting this as an entirely different scheme, which they will have total control and total oversight over. And they want to make sure that it's very different. And you've seen the pictures of the hotels where these people will be housed. And they have made a lot of effort in making sure that they are, clearly, 5-star, as it were, accommodation. So there's a lot of effort going towards proving that this will be an entirely different scheme, where a lot of thought and a lot of planning has gone into. Critics obviously have an entirely different view of all this, and ultimately it's about whether this will come together.
Well, thank you, Taffi. I want to look at to broaden the scope just a little bit regarding migration in the United Kingdom. If you set aside what's happening with this Rwanda scheme, and you also look at what is happening when it comes to migration of those that are seeking education, the study visa, we also know that when it comes to low quality degrees and bringing dependence, the UK is looking to bring down those numbers as well. It's caused a bit of a stir in the country's universities. And I'm wondering, when you pair this, when you look at what's happening with how it's addressing illegal migration on one hand with the Rwanda scheme, and now also trying to bring down the numbers through legal pathways, what do you think it will mean in the long run for the United Kingdom being considered as a destination altogether?
Interesting question. So, obviously, that we are in the post-Brexit era, and what Brexit has meant is that the era of cheap labor is gone, the era of free movement, so where Europeans would come and go. So the United Kingdom has had to look beyond Europe, for labor, and we're talking particularly in the care sector. So about the care visa, which they've opened up to the wider world. But at the same time, you will see now an effort to really drive down the numbers in terms of asylum seekers, in terms of, as you put it, the low quality degrees. So what they are effectively doing is opening up certain channels of migration and closing down on others. So it's as if they are giving with one hand and taking with the other. And I think the narrative there is that we want channels that benefit the UK ultimately, that benefit the economy, and anything else that does not will close down. And that's the political narrative of this government.
Now, what are the legal options that exist? We've seen Amnesty International, the United Nations, even the Archbishop of Canterbury speaking up against this. But what can actually be done by those who feel that this is an unethical solution to dealing with asylum seekers?
Okay, so first of all, of course, what has happened is that the High Court has made a decision in a process called judicial review. Now, what a judicial review in the High Court does is to look at the legality of the scheme itself. Has the government acted lawfully? Has it followed its own policy? In other words, has it not gone beyond the bounds of its own laws, what we call ultra vires? And that's the scope of this judicial review, of this action that was before the High Court. And the High Court was very careful and very specific in saying that we do not look at the wider political issues, the policy issues. That's not for us. The High Court simply looks at whether this scheme was lawful or not. Now, what the High Court has said is that the scheme itself has been operated lawfully. The government has followed its own laws. It hasn't done anything unlawful in terms of the policy itself. However, the High Court has also said that you do need to now go into individual applications. So there is a scope there, basically an opportunity for the individuals that are affected, 47 of the applicants in that judicial review, to go back to court and argue that in their own specific cases, it would not be suitable to return them to Rwanda. So that's number one, and that's a very important point. But secondly, as I've said, this is the High Court. There is now the opportunity of taking this to the Court of Appeal, and the Court of Appeal has wider scope. It looks at wider issues, not just the legality of the scheme, but it can look at whether this scheme, you were talking about the morality and all those things. It can go beyond just the legality of the scheme, as does the Supreme Court. So we are in the early days of this litigation. You will see a lot of this rambling through the courts, and we are looking at perhaps 2023, 2024 for some finality of litigation.
Very well said. African Affairs Analyst Taffi Nyawanza, thank you so much for your insight, and thank you for joining us on Newsday.